Through the process in determining the job logic and finding out which activities precede and or succeed each other activities, relationships are then applied to define how activities are connected. Sometimes we refer to these relationships as a construction constraints logic. And there are 4 types of relationships, as we can see here, that we can put them to sequence each other in the activities, starting from 1, finish to start relationship. The finish to start relationship actually is the most common relationship in our industry, or what we usually call it a traditional relationship, which is when one activity finishes, a successive activity can start. And I want to remind you again on the example we gave on the column. I finish the construction activity of assembling the steel rebar of the column, and then the second activity, when that's done, to put the formwork around the rebar, and then the third activity, when this is done, which is pouring the concrete, once the formwork is done, and so on. So this is a finish to start activity. Second is start to start relationship. A start to start relationship is when one activity starts, so can another activity also starts. For example, we can, let's say, start with the HVAC or HVAC activity, or the plumbing activity, or electrical activity at the same time when the site has been done, and want to start all these at the same time. But of course, in this case, what I just mentioned, these activities, they do not need to finish at the same time. Number 3, a finish to finish relationship. This kind of connection or relationship is when one activity finishes, so does another one finishes at the same time. For example, the project closeout does not finish until the punch out list activity is completed. Last one is the start to finish activity or relationship, I'm sorry. This final relationship is the least used type. You can find it in a lot of scheduling and planning textbooks, and you can study it, but it is not that common in our industry, which says that when one activity starts, another activity will finish. So we rarely use it in construction. Sometimes it's there, you can find a lot of examples, but it's rarely been used. So in my humble experience and research, the start to finish is not as useful as the other activity relationships that we just explained, the first 3. So now let's take a simple example to better understand the job logic and network diagram, and build one together here, which will be the basic foundation for us then for later step in the second course, focusing pure in scheduling and the network diagrams. So we have here a structure that I will ask you, or I will go through step by step how I want to build a network diagram to show the relationships between the components we have in this very simple example. So from what I see here, we have 4 columns in this structure, and there is 2 beams. Each beam sits in 2 columns. So beam number 1 sits in column 1 and 2. Beam number 2 here sits on column 3 and column 4. And on top of beam 1 and 2, we have the slab over them. So think about it as if this is a Lego game, and I give this to you and I want you to build it. What you're gonna do here first? First, you want to start to think what kind of components I have in the structure. So I have 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7 components. These components or elements, I want to represent them as nodes. So let's say we have node 1 and node 2. These nodes or circles can be joined by a straight line to show the relationship between the relationship and type of contacts between the elements or the components of the project. So if we have 1, 2 that says with this arrow that we have component 1 will be built first, then component 2 will be built second. So that being said, then we have 4 columns, and I would love you to start by placing the first 2 columns. Let's say column 1 and column 2. And we have beam 1 that the relationship is look like that. As it says that we are building column 1 and column 2. After we finish both columns, we will be building beam 1. In the same time, there is another 2 columns, as we said, column 3, column 4, and we have here beam 2, and the same thing applies, that we are building the other 2 columns and then put the beam 2 on top of both of them. If you can see from here, it's my preference or strategic management preference or relationship that I want to decide which column I want to start from. I can start from column 1 and 2, or I can start from column 3 or 4. So there is kind of a strategic or preference relationship in that aspect. However, a physical or technical relationship applies here and applies here. You can build the beam before building the 2 columns for both sides. And that's the same thing applies for our slab. So when you build and finishes both of the beams, then you can start work on your slab, this is also a physical or a technical relationship. So here what we have then the logic behind building this small, simple structure that we have. So based on our example that we just gave, I would love for you to actually work on another question. What if I extended this structure to have 2 slabs, not 1 slab? So in this case, we have slab number 1 is set on top of beam number 1 and beam 2, and slab number 2 sits on beam 2 and beam 3. And in this case, we have now 6 columns, and the additional elements that we added here, in addition to what I spent in the slab, is column number 5, which is kind of hidden here behind the structure, and column number 6, which beam number 3 sits on top of both columns. So try to bring a piece of paper here and work on putting the logic or the network diagram for the simplest components or the elements of this structure. Just keep it simple. If you want to put them in as a physical relationship between all of them, how that will be. So for that question, how we can look at the solution at the following. We have column 1, column 2, and we have beam 1. And we said the relationship goes like that, similar to what we did in the previous example. And then we have the same thing for column 3 and column 4 and beam 2. And we have here slab number 1 in this case. And the relation, as we extend also, pure physical relationship, technical, that highlight that we finishing column 1 and column 2, and then we building B1 or beam number 1, and then we building column 3, column 4, we building beam number 2. Once these two beams are available, we can build slab number 1. The same thing for the last two column or the additional structure that we just explained from column 5 and column 6. We are building them, and then we go with beam number 3. And the relation is the same technical relationship that when we finish column 5 and column 6, we can build beam number 3. Once this done and beam 2 is done, then slab number 2, it can be built. So this is the logic network diagram for our question. So what we explained so far from the job logic diagram and the network, this is just like the basics and the foundations, something very introductory level, which we will much more advance on the network diagrams in the following course, because the following course will be focusing on the scheduling tools that have been used in our industry and how we actually deal with the network diagram. And I'll explain in a minute about it just for one quick slide. So far, what we will be highlighting is the construction project planning, and as I explained to you, the main key elements that we went through and covered were the work breakdown structure, which we explained in details, and how at the end we came up with the activity list, and we advanced on that on what is a coding system for our project and the project code from standard and the project focus, and then some introductory and foundation level of what as a planner need to think about when you estimate an activity duration or cost. And then for today or for this module, we focus on determining the job logic and the sequential relationships among activities and their types of connections and their types of relationships. And then we took a simple example of draw a graphic presentation in a network diagram, which we will advance on for the following course, which will be focusing more on a project scheduling. And here, I just want to give you a quick introduction about also the process it will go through and highlight how the planning is very well connected to the scheduling phase or process in any construction project, from starting by breaking down the scope of work into manageable portions namely its activities, estimating each activity duration, establishing the sequence relationships among activities. So the first three, if you noticed, we covered in much more details as a good planner, and then it will be shifting more and more towards the following scheduling techniques from finding the earliest and latest possible times of each activity, and then looking up the project's critical sequence of activity, which we'll refer to it for later, the critical path of our project, and then it will be reviewing, optimizing, communicating, managing, in general using the schedule, which will be our next topic.